Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining the talk. I'm Jan-Karim Höhne. I'm the second author, and I jumped in for my first author, Revilla, who cannot join the conference, unfortunately. I'm giving our talk on millennials and other age cohorts and their participation in web surveys. But before I start, I would like to thank Melanie for all the hard work she put into this research. Let's start with the presentation. Let's start with millennials and other age cohorts. So in this talk, we look specifically at millennials who were born between 1982 and 2003, and older age cohorts such as silents, boomers, and Generation X. And here we have some famous survey methodologists who were born within these time periods, just to show a landscape of the field. Communication style. Let's check the communication style of millennials. So what we know so far is that the communication skills of millennials seems to differ from older age cohorts, especially with respect to quality. So it seems that their communication skills are of lower quality than those of other or older age cohorts. They also show, or millennials also show, an affinity towards computer-mediated communication tools or channels. For instance, they also have more frequently social network site profile compared to older age cohorts, just like the Generation X or the boomers. And finally, it's quite interesting to see that millennials seem to be more quickly when it comes to processing information online compared to older age cohorts. So given these facts, or at least these research outcomes on the communication styles of millennials, there are also a good reason to assume that they maybe differ when it comes to web survey participation. So for instance, when it comes to the topics under research, or like incentives that researchers can provide to respondents or different respondents groups, or also just survey layouts. So more specifically, actually, it's interesting to see whether different kinds of survey aspects may affect survey participation in web surveys and break-offs and so on. So far, the current research is characterized by a lack of studies looking at specific age cohorts. So normally researchers look at age as a continuous variable instead of looking at specific age cohorts. And so when it comes to survey participation and break-off, there's just a small body of research that looks at the effect of age cohorts on participation rate and break-off rate in web surveys, and even less of these studies focus on mobile web survey completion. So there is definitely a lack of empirical evidence. This study builds on a study published by Bosch et al. In 2018, but it also extends the study by Bosch et al. In 2018. So for instance, we use data from 2 probability-based online panels. We look at different countries. We also include the silent cohort. We use different aspects of survey evaluation, and we also look at data quality, and additionally conduct regression analysis to control for potential confounders in the analysis. Overall, we have 6 hypotheses. The first one is on participation rate, the second on break-off rate, the third one is on smartphone participation rate, and then we have 2 hypotheses on survey evaluation, the first one on survey difficulty, and the second one on survey enjoyment. And the final one looks at data quality and assumes that millennials produce similar quality data quality than older age cohorts. Let's take a look at the data. So in this study, we use data from the CROSS, which was conducted in Estonia, Slovenia, and the UK, and the German Internet Panel, which of course was conducted in Germany. So while the people or the respondents in the CROSS got an unconditional incentive, the JIP respondents got a conditional incentive. We also tried to harmonize the data collection period. So the CROSS was conducted in December 2016 to February 2018. So here we use 6 successive waves from the German Internet Panel, which were conducted in 2017. More specifically, we use data from waves 27 to wave 32. The sample size in the JIP is about 3,200, and for Estonia we have about 800, for Slovenia about 700, and for the UK about 900 respondents. Analysis. So the main indicators we use in this study. Overall, we use 7 indicators that we look at. The first one is participation rate, and the second one is break-off rate. Then we also look at smartphone participation rate, then the rate of difficult surveys and surveys that were enjoyed by respondents. And finally, we have 2 indicators on data quality, so the rate of non-substantive responses and the rate of selecting the first answer category, which we call primacy effect. So for instance, participation rate is defined by the number of started surveys divided by the number of survey invitations, just for instance. First, when it comes to the analysis, we first conduct descriptive analysis, comparing the millennials to older age cohorts with respect to the previously mentioned indicators. And then we also conduct regression analysis, and the main reason is to look for potential confounders that may play a role and that are not discovered by the descriptive analysis. Let's take a look at the descriptive analysis, or at the descriptive results. So overall, for the first hypothesis on the participation rate, we have supporting evidence. So more specifically, we can see that the participation rate is significantly lower for millennials than for older age cohorts. We have also partial evidence for our second hypothesis on break-off rate. So again, the break-off rate is significantly higher for millennials than for older age cohorts. This applies to Estonia and the UK. We have also some supporting evidence on hypothesis 3 on the smartphone participation rate, and we can see that smartphone participation rate is significantly higher for millennials than for the older age cohorts. This applies to 9 out of 12 comparisons. However, we have no supporting evidence for our 2 hypotheses on survey evaluation. So there's no evidence for our hypothesis on survey difficulty. And there's also no evidence for our hypothesis on survey enjoyment. So it seems that there's no difference between millennials and older age cohorts. And finally, when it comes to hypothesis 5 on data quality, we have some supporting evidence indicating that the survey data quality of millennials is comparable to the quality, survey data quality produced by older age cohorts. So in the next step, we now look at the regression analysis. So again, in line with the descriptive analysis, we can see that we have supporting evidence for the CROSS and the GIP, and this applies to all three age cohorts, Generation X, Boomers, and Silents, implying that the participation rate is always higher for these older age cohorts than for the Millennials. So next, again, we have supporting evidence for break-off rates, and this is again quite consistent. We see that the break-off rates are higher for Millennials or lower for the older age cohorts, but higher for the Millennials. Again, this applies to the CROSS and to the GIP. With respect to the survey evaluation in terms of difficulty and enjoyment, we have some partial evidence. So we can see that, for instance, when it comes to the silence in the CROSS and for survey difficulty and for the Generation X and Boomers in the GIP when it comes to survey enjoyment. So finally, when we look at our fifth hypothesis on data quality, again, there's only little support for our fifth hypothesis. We only obtain supporting evidence for the Generation X and the CROSS for primacy effects, selecting the first response category. And we also have supporting evidence for primacy effects in the GIP when it comes to Generation X and silence. For all the other groups, we cannot obtain any supporting evidence, and this especially applies to non-substantive answers. So again, there's just little support for our hypothesis 5. So we're almost at the end of the talk, so let's conclude. Overall, we can see that the participation rate is lower for Millennials than for other age cohorts, more specifically for Generation X, Boomers, and Silents. This similarly applies to break-off rates. It's higher for Millennials than for older age cohorts. And in some cases, the smartphone participation rate is also higher for Millennials than for older age cohorts. However, when it comes to survey evaluation and to data quality, so we only find mixed results. The overall conclusion from this results is that Millennials differ from older age cohorts when it comes to survey participation, break-off rate, and smartphone rate. This also points to the fact that we have to improve future surveys to encourage or engage Millennials to participate in web surveys. Overall, taking a look at the survey literature, some research already started to proposing new ideas that may help to engage or encourage Millennials. So for instance, using emojis, images, or also voice answers. However, I think there's definitely more to do. So finally, it's to say that still more research on Millennials and age cohorts is necessary. Thank you so much for your time and consideration. I hope you enjoyed the talk, and I hope you enjoy the GOR conference. This talk is based on a paper by Melanie and me, which is currently in press and survey research methods. So who's interested, just download it. It's open access. Again, thank you so much, and goodbye.